Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Economic and Community Development Meeting. Today is Monday, February 14th, 2022. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. If you're joining us, the first item on our agenda is roll call.
Councilmember Larner?
Here.
Councilmember Michaud?
Here.
Councilmember and Chair Tony Troutner?
I am here. Thank you very much. And thank you, Rhonda, for keeping us on track today. Next up is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes?
No changes.
Perfect. We will move on to approval of the minutes from our January 10th, 2022 meeting. Any questions? All right. A motion's in order.
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next up is our first action item for today, and it is the Countrywide Planning Policy Amendments and Urban Growth Capacity Report, and Kaelene is going to be joining us remotely today.
All right, there I am. Thank you all. A special thanks for allowing me to join remotely, as you can probably understand why. My family all has, so here we are to keep everyone safe. Anyway, I'll be giving a presentation to you today about the countywide planning policies. And because, okay, there we go. Thanks, Rhonda. Now I can see it. So my name is Kaelene Nobis. I'm the Senior Long Range Planner in Economic and Community Development. Today we're going to talk about this presentation, which will outline the update to the countywide planning policies, which passed out of King County Council in December. Next slide, please. So we'll start with some background information about the update process, and then we'll delve into more specific content of the CPPs that are before you tonight for ratification. Next slide, please. So first off, what are the CPPs, or countywide planning policies? Generally, the CPPs are a planning framework for King County that all cities must plan within, in addition to the statutory requirements of the Growth Management Act and the Vision 2050 multi-county planning policies, which are laid out by PSRC. So next slide. In other words, it's kind of this tier of framework we have to plan within. So our comprehensive plan must flow from these countywide planning policies, which also fit within the context of higher planning contexts like the county, the region, and the state. Next slide, please. So the last major update to the CPPs was actually in 2012, originally passed in 1992 after the GMA. That was it. And so this time around, it was decided not to do a complete overhaul of every chapter, but the housing chapter did receive an extensive amount of work. Generally, the process for updating the rest of the document was to ensure equity-related considerations for regional and legislative changes that have happened since 2012, and to establish new growth targets for cities' comprehensive planning. This approach was codified in the guiding principles approved by GMPC in June 2021. And the CPP update has been years in the making, with the Growth Management Planning Council being the primarily elected body in charge of this update, which they approved in June. And then it went on to King County Council for consideration in December. And then there's a 90-day codification process, which puts us into April for us to codify the policies. Next slide, please. So all this to say that Kent has actually been really, really involved. I wish Haley was here so we could toot her horn, because not only through Haley's participation on IJT, but also Councilmember Core is on GMPC. And so IJT is the interjurisdictional team, which is the staff group for Growth Management Planning Council. And they're actually tasked with writing the CPPs. So it's a joint city-county effort, and not all cities are represented at IJT. So having Haley at the table really gave us a leg up. She was able to take the lead on the entire economy chapter, and based off of that was able to really influence the Industrial Valley, the industrial code section parts based off of the research we did on Rally the Valley. Additionally, all cities participated in growth targets process through this regional geographies kind of establishment, which Kent is considered a core group, but I'll touch on that a little bit later. There's a lot of context there. But for now, suffice to say that Kent has been at the table, both at council member cores level and at staff level. And so that's pretty good news for us. Next slide, please. So we are going to talk about what's actually in the CPPs and the changes that have been made, but at a pretty high level, because as you're aware, your packet was 500 something pages. This is a lot of information to get through. So there are 6 chapters, and we'll touch on each of them, but go most in depth in the housing chapter. Next slide, please. So the environment chapter mostly changed only to update equity concerns, but this is really important because there is some racial equity components with recognizing the disproportionate ways that climate affects different communities. It also updated the greenhouse gas emission targets and refers to the most up-to-date climate science and requires King County to develop specific emission inventories in partnerships with cities, which another place we're well positioned in as being partners with K4C. That's something that is already in the works for Kent to update greenhouse gas emissions inventories. So I recommend, if you're interested in what the county's latest thinking on the best ways to combat climate change and how to ensure a healthy and equitable natural environment for King County's residents, that you read through this chapter. Next slide, please. So the public facilities chapter contains some of the nitty-gritty stuff about governments that's not super fun, but is really crucial to making sure that all of our residents are served and their well-being is taken into account, such as utilities, water, sewer, schools, and all essential services. Most of this update, again, was equity-related language to ensure that historically underserved and communities, my apologies, are receiving an equitable investment so that we can see a reduction in disparities served at the facilities level. Next slide, please. So the transportation chapter was updated to be more specific in cases about the needs for multimodal options rather than just increasing vehicle capacity on roadways. And our public works staff at the time was April, was involved with this update. So it will fit really nicely into when we have to update the comp plan. Our transportation and our TMP update should be pretty in line with these transportation CPPs. Next slide, please. So the economy chapter, this is where Haley really got to make sure that we put Kent's fingerprint on. And she was the lead for this chapter, and we were able to get some really great language in there about the importance of middle wage jobs, the role that manufacturing plays on our regional economy, supporting BIPOC-owned businesses, and connections with workforce development programs. It's really exciting. There's some specific language that was incorporated in here that reflects Kent's Industrial Valley's needs and recognizes our role in a strong economy. So I really encourage you to give this section a read. One specific win was there was a lot of kind of back and forth on some language in there about strictly limiting incompatible uses, which is a antiquated way that the CPPs and regional policy in general has looked at our industrial valleys. And it was something that we dove into in Rally the Valley and discovered that this outdated conception of industrial land is just not serving us well. And it's codified into our regional policy. So essentially we could be at odds with our regional policy. So getting that language updated was a really great win for us to affect long-term change in how industrial planning works in our region as a whole. Next slide, please. So the housing chapter, this one's interesting and had the most amount of change. Staff from all cities reviewed and gave comments, but ultimately there were so many policies that everyone wanted to kind of throw into the housing chapter. I reviewed it as well, that we are going to need to go through everything with a really fine-tooth comb when we do our comprehensive plan update. But some of the biggest things here are the needs to conduct an inventory and analysis of housing needs and conditions, which we did something like that in K-HOP, but the stipulations in the CPPs are so specific, K-HOP's analysis will likely not suffice for this. And we'll have to do more work and a fresh analysis during our comp plan. And another big piece to analyze local history of racially exclusive and discriminatory land use policies, including some documentation on where that occurred in Kent. Next slide, please. So as you imagine, there's a lot that we'll have to tackle here when we do our comp plan updates. And generally we supported most of it. There was a sticking point with the South King County cities as a whole, which was that the CPPs did take kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to housing affordability. And it took this approach that every city within the county needed to meet the exact same minimum percentage of affordable housing, despite like the vast differences in the opportunity that exists in these zip codes today. So we know, for example, that there are zip codes that have better schools and more parks, and it changes your life outcomes. And we also know that there are zip codes that already have a huge percentage of, a stricter percentage of affordable housing in their communities. So what we really wanted to see is essentially the wealthier communities kind of also providing, and not providing necessarily the same amount, but backdating what they should have been providing all along. So joining in with other South King County cities, we wrote a letter, sponsored some amendments. The city of Tukwila council member sponsored those. And we put those out into the world. Next slide. But they did not pass. So one of the things that happened with that instead is that there was a change made at the last minute that essentially under the Affordable Housing Committee would be responsible under King County Council Member Balducci to take up all of these issues that the cities had with the housing CPPs and establish a new method to hold jurisdictions accountable and essentially finish drafting the CPPs or any amendments to the CPPs by the end of this year. So it's a tall order, but we will be following this and tracking this really closely, especially with Councilmember Core on GMPC. Next slide, please. So the last chapter is the development patterns chapter. And this is focused on how land is used and developed to accommodate growth. And this included establishing new growth targets, which there was a lot of work that went into growth targets and how they're decided. So next slide, please. Growth targets are a kind of a policy statement about what we're going to plan for and the amount of growth and a jurisdiction is going to plan for their comprehensive plan. And creating them was a little bit of an art and a science because growth targets generally do come from a very high level from the Office of Financial Management, and then PSRC comes in there and breaks down those larger growth area projections by county and regional geography. And then beyond that, they're broken down further. And that's what I mentioned by core cities, and they're cities with higher populations. And we're given this pool and we have to divvy it up between all of us. And so there's some science there, but then there's the art with the politics side of when we start negotiating with our numbers. Next slide, please. So getting to the final housing goal was exactly as I described on the previous slide. We initially actually were given a higher goal based off of 5 data factors, which only one of which is the urban growth capacity study, which we're also ratifying that's in this document. That took many staff hours to establish essentially a capacity number for the city, but then additional factors were put in until the first number was spit out. When you average the additional baseline for our growth targets for Kent was 14,428 housing units, and data from our the study we did for UGC showed that we were growing at a rate where we would have met our additional housing targets, but not where we would meet this. It would represent an increase of 58% for the way we're growing now, which is 575 additional units per year. We didn't think that this was a practical goal, and so we wrote a detailed letter explaining why we thought that, the assumptions that were made in our growth and how we're zoning for. And some other cities were willing to take more, like Bellevue. So our housing target got lowered to 10,200, which is still a higher growth rate than we're experiencing of 400 units per year. The jobs target, we're not concerned about this because it's not really within our control, but Rally the Valley changes happened before, not like kind of right during this. So we're expecting to see the job increase from Rally the Valley help us to meet this target. So there wasn't a lot of discussion on the job target as much. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was a lot. There's a lot of stuff. We made it through the CPPs generally. And so we're gonna have a lot to do in our comprehensive plan update, which we're scoping now. And additionally, the housing chapter with, combining the things that are happening at legislative session now, the fact that we have the Kent Housing Options Plan, and the Affordable Housing Committee work all kind of, are going to combine for us some significant changes to the housing element of our comp plan. But with the continued participation with the county and our position in all of the committees we're on to, be knowledgeable of what's happening when it's happening, we will be able to leverage those resources and make the most out of that work. Next slide, please. And so kind of just a little work still ongoing reminder that the new CPPs to come out by the Affordable Housing Committee will happen by the end of the year, and will then come back to ECDC for ratification. So we'll keep you in the loop as those evolve. But for now, we'll have all of the CPPs that are on the table. Next slide, please. So the motion before you tonight is to ratify the CPPs as were passed out of King County Council. Some of the other issues that are being dealt with at the same time as the affordable housing component that aren't specific to us, but just so you're aware of them, is that there were some issues with Semamis's growth target. And that's continuing to be studied and will be adopted later as well. And because there was some issue with their growth targets being 0. And so I do encourage you to look through the CPPs and get in touch with me if you have any questions. But for now, we are asking you to ratify the updated policies, and that includes the urban growth capacity report. And we do think these countywide documents generally represent a positive direction for Kent. Not without challenge, but due to our continued collaboration and hard work, we will get there. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening to me talk for 20 minutes.
Council members, any questions? Councilmember Larmer.
Just a comment first, Kaelene, thank you for this presentation. It was really well laid out and very helpful. So I actually sit on the Affordable Housing Committee, and I can tell you that our topic last week with almost the entire session was on the CPPs and the recommendations we will be making over this next year. So just to let you guys know, I'm advocating for things that are unique to Kent. And when it comes to measurements and planning, a few things that don't always get included is that the mobile homes, we have a higher inventory than other cities in that area. So how do we get those counted towards our numbers? A lot of preservation efforts. If you just look at flat numbers, it doesn't always include that. So I'll continue to do that work and make sure that to what authority we have as an advisory committee, that we can get some of those South King County, more South King County specific measurements added into that language. So, but yeah, just thank you for this. I thought it was a very comprehensive, kind of pulling it all together, because there's a lot of different committees and policy reviews happening right now on it. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Kaelene, and for your work, Councilmember Larmer. So my question is, are you recommending that we approve this? I mean, 400 seems like a lot.
So the growth targets in particular are pretty set in stone at this time. We would, at this, essentially right now, only 70% of cities need to ratify. If we don't ratify, if we take no action, then we essentially ratify them by default. So we would need to make a pretty substantial, like, I guess I don't know the legal requirement to changing them, but I don't think that they're as moldable at this time. And the 400 is considerably better than the 525. And we did have to average out with other cities and kind of take what we deemed to be our fair share. And so we did. Everyone's goals went way through the roof. So yeah, that might not be the most comprehensive answer for you, Councilmember Michaud, but.
Kurt, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. Jump in here. So she said it well. Reality is the CPPs are adopted, obviously, countywide. It's a ratification that cities are going to do together after 2 years of data crunching on the Urban Growth Capacity Report. Used to be called the Buildable Land Study, for those of you that have been around here for a while. Just an incredible amount of work goes into that data. The 400 units a year, just for rough numbers, we do around 100 to 150 single family a year. Now that's static, snapshot in time, recent look back. That's probably what we average. So there's a decent 5-year average for you. Going forward, well, what are we running out of? We're running out of land. So the single family numbers are going to go down. But as anybody that's tuned in on the state side of things, the legislative actions, and frankly what we intended to do with KOP anyway, is turn the other side, is turn the density numbers where it makes sense from an infrastructure delivery standpoint, transit delivery standpoint, kind of those moves. We know we're going to have to go up. So you have Midway, it's not built, and all the $2 billion worth of investment in public infrastructure that's about to happen there. Effectively, envision Midway, the sub-area planning effort that happened there, just from a density standpoint, is planned to accommodate about half of Bellevue. So from a planning standpoint, and this is hard to kind of dissociate with reality we see out on the street when we're cruising around, and then plan view looking at our policy work. We're trying to lay the groundwork to accommodate that density. There's a ton of catch up on infrastructure delivery, fire suppression, water service, sewer. But it's also a 2044 target. So 400 units a year kind of averaged out. We're going to have lean years, and then we're going to have years that we're going to look down at the 400 number. I know we'll crush it. So I think from a regional planning standpoint, it's a number that was negotiated heavily for months and months. So I think that's probably the best we're going to do, and we kind of need to play ball on this one. I think Kent has a lot of room to grow with density, and we just need to do it deliberately and sensitively around infrastructure. So there's my planning wonk answer for you guys.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you very much, Kaelene, and especially thank you to Haley. I'm sure she's not watching, but hopefully you can pass on a message to her that we really appreciate all the work that she's done as well. And I know you'll be coming back to us over time so we can make updates to this. But I think the way it was presented today makes it very easy for us to understand, and hopefully anyone else that's watching. So thank you very much. Any other questions? All right. Would you like to present a motion?
Yes, Chair, I move to recommend the full City Council ratify an amendment to the King County Countywide Planning Policies and adopt the Urban Growth Capacity Report through ordinances 19369 and 19384, subject to approval by the Economic and Community Development Director and the City Attorney.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Kaelene, take care of yourself and your family.
Yes, thank you. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you. All right, up next on our agenda, we've got a few information-only items. The first one is a Bridges Community Annexation Update. So welcome, Matt.
Hi, Matt Gilbert, Deputy Director, ECD. I'm excited, maybe not excited. I'm happy to be here to update you on bridges. This is a topic that has been with us for a number of years now, but I think when I'm done, you'll have a better understanding of why and where we're going with this. So let's see. I'll give you a really quick refresher on it in case you weren't thinking about it all the time. So it's about 155 acres. You see it circled down at the bottom. It's an island of Kent. It became an island of Kent surrounded by Auburn when Auburn annexed the Lee Hill neighborhood back in 2008. It was known as Verdana. It was known as the reservoir property because that's why the city purchased it originally back in, I think, 87 or so. When that became something that was no longer needed, the city decided to market the property. So it was purchased by a developer and eventually became named The Bridges, which is what it's known as today. There's an HOA there with 386 homes, lots of park and open space. In fact, there's about 55 acres of open and rec space there. So it's kind of a unique environment. So see, that's actually, I was surprised to know that the last homes there were built out just last year. I was kind of flipping through the Google images, and so it was built between about 2007 and 2021. Of course, you had a housing bust in there. We can't talk about the bridges without acknowledging the 13 acres at the south end that has been before this council in the past in the form of a comprehensive plan amendment proposed by Oak Point, who owns that area. They have actually been part of our discussions regarding the annexation because, frankly, the community is really interested in what they're going to do with that 13 acres. And so now Oak Point has been gracious to work with the cities of Kent and Auburn, understanding that this annexation has taken place. And they've tried to move forward at times when they've realized that the annexation conversations are actually happening and how kind of awkward a situation it is here for a while. They've agreed to kind of pull back, continue to talk with us, make some behind the scenes headway in terms of their plan development. But right now, there's no decision to be made by either the Kent or Auburn councils on that land. So we're trying to kind of get that to a point where there's more permanent surety going forward. So I want to talk for a minute about, oops, we'll go the other way. There we go. For a minute about the conversation between Kent and Auburn that's taken place. That began back in 2018. We'd kind of mapped out the straightforward annexation process. It seems simple, just change it from Kent to Auburn, right? Well, of course, it's more complicated than that. Once we started talking about the infrastructure that's out there, we started talking about the neighborhood, the future development. I know we haven't seen a PUD come through. That's sort of a term that we don't really do PUDs too much anymore, but that's what Oak Point was, it's kind of a complicated land use approval that allowed for higher density zoning than was allowed at the time, but there were all kinds of stipulations with it. So there were a lot of questions on Auburn's part about how that PUD would affect future growth and development. And so it got fairly complicated. There's also a lot of infrastructure in that 155 acres, and infrastructure requires maintenance, and of course, a city that's receiving infrastructure is going to want to know that that what they're receiving is, the condition of it, and they wanted to see the records. So we've been working with Auburn on providing all of that. We've also been making sure maintenance is all caught up so that they know that what's out there is in great shape. But it's great. Our public works departments are working very well together. So we're talking about transferring records, transferring permits. So it's complicated. We are making headway. It's just that there are a lot of questions to be answered. So that's one big issue. I hit a little bit on future development. Maybe I got ahead of myself here. So I guess just this last point on this, that if the annexation proceeds, and I'll get to if in a second, but Oak Point will engage with Auburn. And one of the things we heard during those comprehensive plan discussions from the community was, the question was, why isn't Auburn making this decision? And we had to talk to them about jurisdiction and things like that. But Oak Point and Auburn are, we're part of the same discussions, and so I think that everyone's thinking about strategies for the long term there. So I think that will be a popular thing with the community. So I'll hit on just a few other moving parts just to kind of illustrate why this is complex. Open space, that's the open space. 55 acres, it's mostly a wetland, but that's a lot of land to be responsible for. That's one concern that's come up. You've got illegal dumping, you've got unauthorized use, you've got invasive species and things like that. And so trying to work out who will be responsible for that is one big question that's come up. Another one is engaging the residents. There are questions about, will my taxes go up? Who will provide police and fire service? What about voting districts? What about schools? And that's something that as we move forward with the annexation, we'll tackle that a little bit more directly. Of course, through the comp plan process before, some of these questions did come up, and so there's been some informal answers. Another one is that the annexation process is, there's a process provided in state law, but moving an island of one city into another is something that really doesn't happen very often. And so as we move through the formal process, there's something called the Boundary Review Board, and they have the opportunity to review annexations. We're not sure what they're going, how they're going to take this. I mean, they'll either review it or they won't, but it's something that, just doesn't happen a lot. So there's some complexity there. And then finally, the transferring of assets, figuring out who's going to process permits and where the records go and how they go. That's just another thing. So I think I've said enough about how complicated it is. There's just a lot of things to tick off. But I want to talk about next steps. I don't want to cover the details of the formal annexation process because we're not quite there and it'd just be too much for today. I can get into that later, but I think this will be coming back to you in not too long. And our attorneys are working out an agreement between the two councils that says officially we're all interested in this, we're all moving forward, and that we're serious about solving, answering the questions, solving the problems, and getting this done. That agreement will likely come forward in the form of a resolution for the city of Kent and the city of Auburn, sort of identical resolutions to be adopted by the councils that will kind of put that official stamp on the process going forward. And after, I think what we'll outline in that resolution is, a commitment to determine cost and service impacts to the residents on, a lot of the utilities, garbage, things like that. We will obtain feedback from Oak Point. They're a major property owner. Of course, I said they hold probably the most interesting part of the whole property, interesting to the residents. So we'll bring them in maybe in a more official capacity. And then, of course, reach out to the Bridges community. We've heard a bit from them in community meetings and informal feedback. But the goal is to go to their HOA and get some, like a motion or get some sort of action that says they, support or don't support the annexation. And then after that, we start the formal process. And as I said, I won't go too far. I won't get into that today. It's pretty dry, and I'll save that for next time. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from anyone?
I'm sorry, when did you say that we would expect to see the resolutions?
Well, I didn't exactly. In the near future.
Okay.
I know that the attorneys at the two cities are, well, one of them's behind me.
We're trading we're trading drafts right now. So the idea, my hope is within about 2 weeks, we should have a resolution done. And then we just want to time them so that they're done as close to the same time for each council. They will be identical. And so I think Auburn's meetings are on Monday nights.
I think so.
I believe so.
Yeah, Monday. So they might go first, and we go on a Tuesday night. So.
And then once we've both signed out, that goes then to the Boundaries Committee?
No, so all we're doing now, we want to do a resolution for each council to make an official statement that says we are looking into this.
Okay.
We don't want to commit you guys, and Auburn doesn't want to commit their council to actually doing the annexation if we can't work it out. And if the HOA board says we don't want to do it. We don't want to be stuck. So we just want to make an official statement, start having real conversation about cost, how to do it, and I think most importantly, get an official statement from the HOA. When you guys dealt with the critical areas issue, most of the people who spoke were not residents of that neighborhood. They were residents of surrounding areas. So we really need to hear from the HOA officially, and that will really, I think, tell both Kent and Auburn whether or not this thing should go forward.
So just by putting together this resolution, it means we're willing to have the discussions, and it doesn't mean that this is going to happen. Yep. Okay.
What it does is it gives staff direction to start really going out and working together and trying to get this thing done and seeing if we can do it.
And will that be?
Also, a joint statement of positive intent to move the thing forward. We've been meeting for months and months and months, but this is very public, and it's kind of getting everyone on the record to say, this is our intent.
Yeah. And would that be something that will come before the whole council?
Yes.
Yep, perfect.
Yeah, I think my only other statement would be just, I think we just need to be really careful and really clear with the messaging, because I think, the public perception, between a resolution and ordinance is not always known. So I just want to be really careful that we don't send a message that suddenly they're annexed or they think they're annexed. So.
Yeah, and that's why we're doing it this way. When we actually do the annexation, that will be also by resolution, but they're annexation resolutions.
Okay.
These are just resolutions of intent to explore the possibility of thinking about maybe annexing.
Let's just be prepared for questions, because there will be the portion I think that's it. So.
And, it affords even more time to kind of socialize this out in the community so that there's plenty of notice and understanding.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? Well, we'll see you soon, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
All right. Next up is the City of Kent Memorandum of Understanding with Avenue 55 update, and Bill Ellis.
Hi, thanks, Council. Let's wait for my PowerPoint here for a second. Nice to see you all. I know it says Avenue 55, Joe Blattner, Drew Zaborowski, and Nick Yaman. I'm none of those. Those are, if you recall, those are our private sector partners, the development team for Avenue 55. Our current Memorandum of Understanding expires with this group on February 22nd, so I wanted to give you an update. They're planning to meet their proposal deadline, and I'm also here to tell you that we're looking to bring forward a extension of just 4 weeks so that we can review the full proposal on March 14th and then vote on it at full council on the 15th. First slide, please. So I just wanted to give a current status. Avenue 55 has been working diligently over the last year to meet their obligations under the MOU. They hired the architecture firm McKinsey. They have done their initial architectural renderings. I've been working with them to collect formal letters of interest, which are non-binding. That's kind of similar to the conversation I think I just overheard. But it's a letter of interest from an end user or tenant that they're going to lease or buy on the property. And so they're currently getting those letters of interest in. We have, I would say, sufficient letters of interest to inform a proposal, really serious parties to be on the site. I don't want to steal the thunder from Avenue 55 on the 14th as to their initial tenant list. But that's been pretty much the process of the last year has been through marketing. And right now they're meeting with general contractors and others to start estimating cost, feasibility. I say that again, cost estimating, I put that in there twice, it's pretty important. But I think there's the cost estimating to build it, and then there's also the cost estimate for a final lease payment for the different types of end users who might have different interest levels. Some of them might have interest to lease to own, some might have interest just to lease, some might have interest to be subtenants, and the permitting. So they're pursuing it right now. They're on a path to do a phased approach to site development, meaning over the full acreage, maybe some of the end users have different timelines than others, or others are still in negotiation. I would expect negotiation with some of the end user businesses to go beyond March 14th, but some of the negotiations to be that the end user needs to be open and operational within 2 years. And so I think that will be a big driving timeline going forward, is those businesses that need to be open within 2 years, meeting milestones from here with the developer. So having some increased confidence from council that we're on that path, I think is an important next step. So I have as a fourth bullet there, anticipating more business letters this month. I will say as recently as last week, they're still meeting with companies on site, talking about a potential proposal, talking about letters of interest with those companies for the site. I would say I can share that the companies that they've talked to are on point to be manufacturing or research and development companies, headquarter companies, that there are nonprofits in the mix. Next slide, please. I have a lot of text on this, but basically I've presented this before and I'm here to say it again, that the city has conducted outreach to nonprofits, specifically in the job training or STEM education arenas that are most relevant to manufacturing. They're very interested and they're meeting regularly to have a work group together to put together a business plan and pursue grants. Again, back to the phase strategy, I think they will play a role on the site immediately and then maybe take down more space as time goes on, but I don't want to get too far ahead of the development team's design work that's ongoing right now. We're communicating with Avenue 55 about reserving some portions of the site within the proposal and then maybe in the future with their development agreement for those users. The process, again, we have an MOU that expires on February 22nd. That was just to have them co-market with us and do some basic entitlement and feasibility work, which they've done. I expect the full proposal very shortly, and we will take it to this committee on the 14th with renderings and drawings. Joe Blattner won't join us on the 14th. He's the principal, but Drew Zaborowski will, and Nick Yaman, who works in the firm. And then on full council, Joe Blattner, I expect to be there at full council and the Avenue 55 team to present their full proposal on the 15th. At that time, we'll have some initial list of tenants. Again, it's by letters of interest, so it's non-binding. Should the developer not be meeting their timelines, or it doesn't look good for the manufacturer, or vice versa, or on pricing, things could change. But as indicated in the MOU, we would have an indication at the proposal phase as to who we're having come to the site. And then council would have another full vote through the development agreement as to the final look of the project overall. So this is only the proposal, affirmative on the proposal coming on the 14th, would only direct staff to negotiate a development agreement and eventual purchase and sale. It is not the same as saying that is the final development agreement and purchase and sale. It's to see the proposal turn into a formal development agreement, which would actually include pricing. So I wouldn't expect the proposal to have pricing. I think you'll see refinement. If you recall back a year ago, they said these are the types of things it could be. They had images of other places in the world that were similar. What they'll be able to say more specifically next time is, and these are drawings of how it might look on this site, specifically with some initial tenants in tow. Next slide, please. I just wanted to point out that real estate pressure on nonprofits and aerospace firms is continuing. This is a recent headline. I just can't, I looked back a year ago, I had a similar headline. You know, it's just every year it seems to be the same headline. Industrial demand is bigger than expected, bigger than expected. So some of the policy objectives that led us to try to think about affordability for manufacturers and retaining and expanding manufacturers in our region, as well as helping nonprofits that either offer STEM education or job training on the site, those policy reasons, objectives are unchanged. And one of the things I think is kind of tricky right now is every few months there's a supply chain issue or a concrete strike or something else that's kind of changing the pricing of cost to construct. So that's why we have a development team in tow to help estimate those pieces for the end user that might want to build a suit at this site. With that, any questions?
Questions for Bill?
No, it's exciting.
Okay.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman.
And then next up, we have learnings and next steps for the commercial permit assistance pilot project. So don't go anywhere, Bill.
Well, this one I'm doing in tandem with Matt Gilbert. We've talked about this at full council before. We talked about late last year, we talked about a pilot for commercial affordability on the permitting front. And that pilot is now closed. We extended it into the first month of January, and we're just here to share verbally some of our lessons learned and kind of forecast that we're going to come back to this committee with more concrete steps, but we've been looking at it. We hired Darren Medina through the National Development Council. National Development Council started a commercial affordability pilot with King County, where they were looking at brick and mortar businesses that are either having a hard time starting up through the permit process, finding the golden path or least expensive way through the permit process, or we're trying to expand in existing places. So that was a King County program that we continued on in Kent, because originally there were no Kent businesses that were part of that program, but we knew that that same need was an everywhere kind of need. And so we tried, we worked with the chamber to get the word out. We tried Darren Medina out for the next 4 months. I'm not here to tell you every business he worked with because I want to respect the privacy of those businesses, but we put it into several categories. People who were thinking about starting a business, somebody who already was on the path to starting a business or had executed a lease, or somebody who was an established business or nonprofit that was looking to expand. We had all of those categories represented, and Darren Medina brought a lot of experience. He was not a fully licensed architect, but after working 15 years with Starbucks, 5 years with Mod Pizza, he had picked up a thing or two about opening a brick and mortar restaurant. He had a lot of relevant experience to help advise a business owner who might never have encountered the permit counter before, not know any of the technical aspects, and help them either do research about what you need to know before you execute a lease, specifically looking at specific sites. Or if you've already executed a lease and you're having trouble to go through, what are the steps you need to do to get sort of through that process or get out of it or try to get to the right type of general contractor or do design work or what have you. Or he actually did drawings and design work. Maybe I'll turn over to Matt just to expand a little bit about the types of issues I think are common at the permit counter that we see that, I'll talk more.
Sure, thanks, Bill. Yeah, I was so happy that we were able to run this pilot because there's a need out there that I've observed over time as codes, like building codes, fire codes, environmental codes, you name it, have evolved. They've become more and more technical. They're written by technicians for technicians mostly. So someone who wants to open a restaurant or open a brick and mortar shop has a certain set of skills, whatever those may be, that will hopefully make them successful. Those skills probably aren't navigating through the permit process. For just putting the technical nature of the codes aside, just knowing what to do and who to call is often just a total question mark. So one thing Darren was able to help with was connecting folks with specialists. If you need someone to design a plumbing system for a building, you'd go to a plumber and who's licensed and things like that. He kind of demystified some of those things from the applicant side. He also provided some design consultation, directly and on site, and also just talked about just the scope of what's necessary. Really, as these businesses are putting together their prospectus or their pro forma for getting their costs in line, it's a big X on the startup costs, the development costs for the space. And so he helped them to get to a number. Even if that number wasn't what they wanted to hear, at least they could work that into their business planning. So I think that there's, inserting him with other business expertise, I think is really critical. And that's something that I think has been historically missing from the small business development group.
Maybe
so you want to talk about that?
Yeah, maybe I'll elaborate on that point next. So, Matt kind of described the problem statement pretty well. I think there are several things that we've learned in the pilot and why it was a pilot, right? I want to emphasize that it was a pilot. It was a small, limited term. We're not proposing that we bring on board like a permit expediter internal to the city. And he wasn't able to perfectly save every business in every instance. I think one of the fundamental things we learned is people don't know what they don't know until they know it, and it might be too late. And so how do we do more prevention to people getting into a lease where they don't know all the permit information that they need to do, or the research they need to do, or the technicians to really get to that cost sooner, rather than trying to, after executing a lease, paying for rent, and then trying to meet code after the fact. And so, or sometimes people don't necessarily have, Matt referenced a pro forma. Sometimes people go into a business thinking if I find the perfect space, I'll build my building plan around that real estate that I don't fully understand the mechanical system around or whatever. And that's also a mistake. And you want to do the business plan first and then select your site based on your plan. And so these are kind of common mistakes and common errors that we're talking to the Kent Chamber about doing a series of workshops over the course of the year about, and trying to talk to realtors and to bankers and to others and say, hey, advise your clients before you know, this is what they should know in terms of the permit requirements. And then going further, making available resources. Council had in its budget some permit help resources budget from ARPA. And we're looking at how do we spend those resources to create a more durable capacity at the Small Business Development Center, in particular Green River College, to have that sort of on-call advice. Sort of the downside to that is if you have it at SBDC, the helper, we haven't come up with the perfect term of art on this, the helper, the permit helper, will not be able to do as much as when we did during the pilot. The reasons being, if let's say Darren was doing more drawing work, doing more design work, doing actual hiring and firing of general contractors, you're tipping over from advice to actually making the entire college liable for his work. Yeah. So there's a job duty description task that's now being workshopped between city staff and Green River College around adding additional capacity. Traditionally, the SBDCs have good advice around marketing, good advice about how to do a cash flow analysis. They don't have permit experts on call, and so the city could help contract through the SBDC like we currently do to make that more available. There's existing guardrails in place at the SBDC in terms of talking about that. We're talking to the chamber about doing some work with them to sponsor them doing workshops to help get the right people to those workshops. And additionally, Matt and Michelle are working on permit guidelines, permit guidebooks, multimedia guidebooks that we can translate into multiple languages and help people get pointed to the resources even at the permit counter or before they've gone too far. So prevention is our number one thing, but secondly, it would be to have somebody available to have additional capacity at the SBDC long term. So anything else to add? We just wanted to give you an update today that, the pilot, what we learned and what path we're on.
I would say I think it was innovative and it's needed. There is a need. We see it all the time, and we want to fill that vacuum of knowledge so that our folks that are going into business, or even sometimes it's just people who want to work on their house. I mean, that's not the intent, but there's an educational element there as well, that they can know what the rules are before they get too far into the process.
No, I mean, I think Darren said it well. I mean, he spent 20 years working in industry. Big corporations still need specialists to help get through this means. I can't imagine what it is for a micro enterprise. This might be your first encounter with a permit, fire code book, building code book, zoning book. Once in your life, you'll have to do it, and it's the most critical moment in your life, and your life savings are at stake. And we need to make more resources available through that, and we're just trying to find the right partners and right capabilities to do that.
Is this a quick question, and this might be a good question for you, Michelle, too, because I know you've talked to us about the Trusted Community Partner Network. Is this something that is also being communicated through that, or is this something we've kind of taken on our own?
I know it's directed to you, but I think I can answer because I'm just standing here. Mm-hmm. Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that we would like to work with the same organizations that Michelle referenced to help get people to the resources at Green River. Is it a big part of the ADO's work to try to launch the Community Partners Network? No, I don't think it's core. I think the core focus of them still is on COVID-19 relief funds, financial resources, marketing, other things. This brick and mortar is kind of a narrow subset of micro enterprise problems where logically it does connect to the same sort of outside helpers and outside organizations that help make that culturally competent, do the referrals, do the language translation, but it isn't core to the standing up of the Community Partners Network work at this time. It's more of a Kent local initiative.
Mm-hmm. Right. Any other questions?
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for this update.
All right, that brings us to the last item on our agenda, which is adjourning our meeting. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We are adjourned.